And I think too, like it's funny that, well, not funny, but I think it's interesting that like the nutrition element has such a strong undertone of like good motherhood to it, that
Mm-hmm.
it's this, even if you wanted to avoid the tidal wave of that publicity is immense. Like I remember my first child, when she transitioned to solid foods, I made her food. Like I did the ice cube tray thing. I had the baby blender and I was like, oh, this is going to be great. Like we're going to feed her vegetables first and then fruit. So it's like, I just read all this stuff. And then eventually, second kid, I was like, what was I thinking in this whole ice cube thing? Like I had no time for that. Third kid, I was like, which kind of pouch would you like from the grocery store? This has coconut milk? I think that sounds phenomenal. Fourth kid, if you ate, don't eat off the floor, right? Like, it's just...
Yeah. Well, but like, that's okay too.
Right? Don't split it with the dog and you'll be fine. Hello and welcome to the And Both podcast. Here we are going to hear from moms and those in motherhood that are doing the thing that works for them. They are honoring themselves alongside the all-encompassing role and level of expectation that is motherhood. And we are going to hear from as many different people as possible in their own experience. So you can find people to relate to. You can hear stories that will make you laugh, make you cry, all of the above, and that we will come together as a community to support one another in a way that is holistic and honoring of the woman and the mother as a whole. Hello and welcome back to the And Both podcast. I am here today with Samantha Gollup, and we're going to talk about something that I think every single one of us thinks about, whether or not we want to admit it or not. And I think it's really important to open up these conversations, and there's a generational thing that we're going to discuss, I think, in a big way today. But welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Ashley.
So how about if we'll start with you, let people know who you are and what you do and all of the things.
Sure. So I'm Sammy. I am a registered dietitian and I'm in the Midwest. I'm in Madison, Wisconsin. And I have been running Anti-Diet Mama as a private practice for the last several years now. But prior to all of this, I worked in surgical weight management. So where people come to a clinic and they are seeking surgical weight loss, and because they need to lose a significant amount of weight. And as I was working in that clinic, I kind of saw a common theme among many of my patients that they started dieting when they were like 8, 9, 10 years old, and they've been on and off this dieting cycle for many, many, many decades. And with that, their relationship with their body was just so negative, like not even there, like just in this place of body hatred, and really had no significant, what's the right word to say? They had no positive association with food or with their body and couldn't see past this just physicality of it all. And so as I was there, I got into and learned more about intuitive eating and learning to get back in tune with your body's signals. So I taught my patients how to respond to hunger cues and how to respond to fullness cues and, other coping strategies for any emotional eating going on, and just how to balance meals and snacks. And through that, many of my clients would say, I really wish I knew this stuff before I got to this point. Why don't they teach this in schools? Why didn't my parents teach me this? And I think we've gone so far beyond like just this simplicity of feeding ourselves balanced that, either we like have no clue what nutrition is and feeding ourselves, or we are, like so nitpicky about it all. It's such a spectrum that we can be on with feeding ourselves. And let me get to the point here. So I got to this point where I was like, I really just want to be working with kids. I think kids deserve more awareness of their bodies and how to feed themselves and what foods go together and how to respond to hunger and fullness signals and not be so inundated with diet culture and beauty culture so that we're not causing all these issues with food. So I thought maybe I'll go into school nutrition. And then my husband and I decided that we were going to start working on building our family. So as I was kind of in the depths of probably not being so kind to my body, I was kind of looking at myself in a mirror one day and just being like, this isn't sustainable. And I don't want to teach this to my kids. I don't want my kids to see me working out twice a day or going on detoxes and et cetera, et cetera. I really want to teach them how to listen to their body. So kind of getting back to the practice what you preach a little bit. And so I decided I actually want to work with moms and help moms to first improve their relationship with food and their bodies so that they can model that for their kids. So now, long story short, I am working with moms to help them improve their relationship with food and body so that they can model that for their kids. And now I'm kind of working more on the kids side to get a little bit closer to moms as well, because I think as moms, we have very little time to work on ourselves or we don't prioritize that so much. But if we can learn how we can teach our kids to eat and be aware of our bodies and be more embodied, we can start to let that reflect on ourselves a little bit more too. So that's what I do.
I think that's amazing because I think it's one of those things this generation of parent is, I kind of feel like we're playing cleanup on generations of just letting stuff roll downhill and be like, well, next people can get it. It's like the bus stop for you're at the end of the line now. And it's this idea that there's such a focus on diet and body and what your body looks like is an indicator of your health. Meaning,
Yes.
if your body looks ideal according to who, I don't know, but according to a magazine or according to the latest 12-step yada yada, drink this juice, be violently sick and call that hell. I think that it's such a hard thing to know. Everyone's an armchair expert. Everyone has done, their own research in whatever corner of the internet. And there is really no there is no school of thought where we can all refer to. It's just half-hatched information bouncing around between people. So the idea of having someone with a nutrition background and training in that to come in and be let's just put these crappy pieces that don't make any sense aside and think about that, I think is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right on so many levels there. It's so tricky when we see oh, this is the magic thing or this is what worked for me. Which nutrition is complicated and nutrition science is extremely complicated, but what we feed ourselves doesn't have to be, and how we're nourishing our bodies doesn't have to be. It's really as simple as we need to eat enough. We need to eat a variety, and we need to make sure that we are responding to our hunger and fullness, which is complicated if, we're too far removed from that. But yeah, let's just simplify and make it easy on ourselves. And especially when we have such extreme views of what nutrition should be, that's going to rub off on our kids. And we don't want that because that is going to cause some sort of disordered eating, if not eating disorder down the line, which we really want to be avoiding.
Yeah. And I think too, it's funny that, well, not funny, but I think it's interesting that the nutrition element has such a strong undertone of good motherhood to it, that it's this, even if you wanted to avoid it, the tidal wave of that publicity is immense. I remember my first child, when she transitioned to solid foods, I made her food. Like I did the ice cube tray thing. I had the baby blender and I was like, oh, this is going to be great. Like we're going to feed her vegetables first and then fruit. So it's like, I just read all this stuff. And then eventually, second kid, I was like, what was I thinking in this whole ice cube thing? Like I had no time for that. Third kid, I was like, which kind of pouch would you like from the grocery store? This has coconut milk? Yes. I think that sounds phenomenal. Fourth kid, if you ate, don't eat off the floor, right? Like, it's just...
Yeah. Well, but like, that's okay too.
Right? Don't split it with the dog and you'll be fine. Because he didn't share. But it's just that idea of like, there's so much at stake for us as moms because people have told us there's so much at stake that it's so easy to go down these rabbit holes. I think it's like with food. I think it's with weight. I think it's with developmental milestones for kids. And I think it has to do with like maternal child relationship management. Like I think these are big pillars of like, you've got to be the best all the time. You've got to be perfect. You've got to be doing it right. You have to know all the answers. And our generation, broad strokes here, was raised by people that, for the most part, were like of the like 70s, like tab soda, like didn't eat lunch, all of this. Like these people are not people who should be teaching other people how to eat food. And so
I think there is a lot of like generational trauma there too. I think about my parents who are in their mid 70s now, and they, grew up with parents that lived through the Depression. Yeah. So then there's all of this like, don't waste food and, you got to eat everything on your plate. And, there's so much messiness within that and what we learn from generation to generation that just isn't serving our bodies. Like maybe it's serving our wallets or whatever, but there's so much around it, and that like really is built into our DNA, which is kind of wild to think about. So yeah, sorry, I interrupted.
No, I think you're right on the mark. Yeah. Like my grandfather grew up in the Depression, and like it didn't matter. You could pile his plate to the ceiling, and he would just sit there and eat it. Like he'd never complain, never say anything. Just do that. But at the same side, like me as a little kid, like I'd get a plate of food when I went to their house, and he'd be like, why aren't you finishing that? And I'm like, because I'm full, right? Like, I'm full. And then you're sitting there and you're like, this doesn't feel good. And they're not doing it out of like he was like the biggest gentle giant in the world, but it's just like, that's what he grew up with. So then you have your parents who are trying to split the balance of like, that's what they grew up with and not necessarily wanting to do things differently, and then like them having to deal with their own stuff on top of that. Like, I think that the whole concept of fat phobia is alive and very much well in the generation that raised us. And this idea that like, if that happens, it's your fault. We just like scratch off any of the other, contributing factors. It's all about like control and discipline and things.
Yeah, it's so much control. And I think we have a lot of that as millennials too. It's just like, we want, and even Gen Xers, what's above us?
I think X. I don't know. Those guys.
Yeah, those guys. Those ones that are a little bit of there is so much perfectionism. There's so much controlling. And I think that's what I see with a lot of my clients is like they really want to control what their kids are eating because like we think we know best, to the point that we're overriding our kids' hunger and fullness and desires and satisfaction and all of that. And can we just like be a little bit more curious about it and see what happens? We can still present our kids with balance and nutrition and vegetables and fruits and all the things that are great and going to give us solid nutrition. But also, can we not micromanage how many Cheetos they eat or, like how much sugar they're getting and all of that is quote unquote bad? Can we just like incorporate those things once in a while so that our kids learn how to self-regulate around those foods and then go from there, see what happens and give our kids that opportunity. Otherwise, they're going to get out into the world and never know how to act or be around food. They're going to feel out of control around those foods, or they're going to be micromanaging of their own intake. And then that's causing a whole other slew of issues. So
yeah, you get both ends of the spectrum. I have a story that you may like as someone who lives in this space. So when I was a kid growing up, my parents were very like no sugar in the house, right? And so like my brother and I in the morning, we had Cheerios, which like you couldn't make me eat a Cheerio now. But we had Cheerios, and we would like try and sneak sugar to put on the Cheerios, because eating plain Cheerios every day for like 15 years is heinous. And so like it was like it was never whatever. So anytime my brother and I were around it, it would be like this like fast, like you have to get it in there before it gets taken away, or before whatever, you get in trouble, which doesn't even make sense anyways, right? Because it's like food. I went away to college. My freshman year of college, I lived in a dorm, and we had a cafeteria, and the cafeteria was like, you can have whatever. I think it wasn't the entire year, but I think the first few months I ate ice cream for breakfast every single day. I was like living my best life. People are like, they have like cottage cheese and fruit and cereal and all this stuff, and they're like, you're eating ice cream? I'm like, I have waited 18 years. Someone else has made decisions about the food that's in my house, and now like but I don't now. Like I don't do that now, and I definitely would not let my kids do that. But I just remember being like, yes, here I am.
Yeah. Why not? Right. Exactly. You're like coming into your own. And I think as moms too, it's like we want our kids to make decisions for themselves around food, or we want to get to that point. I think ultimately we are providing the structure, we're providing the balance, the variety of the nutrition, but also, are there times where it's appropriate to give our kids more freedom to have some options? And with like toddlers, we start little. Like, do you want broccoli, or do you want bell peppers for dinner? Or do you want this or this? Or when would you like to have cookies this week, or whatever it is? Because that's all they want. They just want some control over what they're eating and over their bodies. And if we try to take that away from them, it is going to go haywire at some point. But same thing with like, take 3 more bites, or, even like a 1 bite rule with a new food or something like that. Again, that's like taking the autonomy away from their bodies and their ability to make choices, or their desire to make choices for themselves. So it really is getting to this, the mealtime division of responsibility, where you're providing and they're deciding, and we really let them have autonomy over that time with their bodies. So I can get more into that if you want, but depends on where we're going.
Which lane are we in? I do have a question that I think is sort of fascinating, because I have 4 kids, and like, one of my kids is growing exponentially. One of my kids eats 2 foods, not literally, but sometimes it feels like that. Or has like that revolving door of like, what isn't acceptable today and what is not. And like, I love this today, I hate this tomorrow. But I think that one thing that we don't talk enough about is portions of food that are served to kids. And that, I think that it comes from our background in, that like finish your plate, clean your plate, whatever. But like, I have a 4-year-old and I have an 11-year-old. And I still now am like, are you still hungry? Like with my like 9-year-old. And they're like, yeah, no, I'm hungry. And meanwhile, like the other one's not touched. So I would love for you to speak to the portion component of feeding.
So there's kind of a rule of thumb that you can follow. But I think if we're talking like really young kids, less is more. Like don't present them with a heap of, the protein and the carb and the vegetables. Really like a bite or 2 of each is enough. And then letting them know like there is more for you to have. Like I'm happy to get you more. With each year of age, a tablespoon per food. So for like a 3-year-old, 3 tablespoons of rice, 3 tablespoons of vegetable, 3 tablespoons of protein. So I'm just kind of breaking that down. And I think that can just continue on. But with kids, growth is not linear. They have like huge growth spurts and they're hungry for like a month.
Everything.
And then for like 3 months, it's like, damn, you're like not eating anything. So it really is like, I don't even really talk about portion sizes with my grownups. It's really like, what do you need today to fill you and make you feel comfortable and satisfied while still keeping in mind the balance and the variety of nutrition. So one good tool that you can use or method to kind of not worry about this so much is like family style eating, where the food is on the table or easily accessible so they can get up and like, or whatever, like just scoop some rice on their plate as they feel hungry and need to be more satisfied. And that's a learning curve, of course. I don't let my 4-year-old do that. I'll always serve them, or even my 2-year-old. But as they get older, they can learn how to serve themselves to a point that is going to make them feel satisfied. And, you can give them reminders and give them verbal cues and just be like, are you full? Do you want more? What's your belly telling you? And then modeling that for them as well. Like, okay, I'm going to take a little bit more of this salad because, that sounds really good to me right now. I still want that crunch and I'm still a little hungry. You can say those things out loud. That was never really modeled to us, I think. And I think was like showing them that you're checking in with your body is really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that family style and the kind of rule of thumb of a tablespoon per food per year is helpful.
I like that because I think too, like that's where people can start to say, like it's not a hard and fast rule, but where you sort of help put some guidelines. I don't want to say boundaries, but you can help put some like fencing around ways to think about it, and then that way, I think that there's so many common questions that people have, like portions. I think is one, like trying new foods, and like vegetables. But I also think that vegetables are often introduced in a like, ooh, I hope you like it, eyes closed, and like the way that they're introduced is a way that doesn't necessarily give them the best PR going in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think too with that, like we put foods on such a hierarchy, right? Like if it's, you need to eat your protein before you are able to eat your dessert, or you have to eat 3 more bites of vegetables. Like think about the messaging that we're putting out there, and the like visceral reaction that we're kind of giving them, or the praise that we're giving them. When we praise them about eating their broccoli, they're going to get suspicious and either we're going to get suspicious or they are eating to please you. And we don't want that either. That's not giving them autonomy over their bodies. So finding a lot of neutrality and like trying to hold your tongue a little bit, because we don't want them to eat for us. We want them to eat for them. And how do we find that like balance with all the things? And that's not to say like they're always going to choose the broccoli over the brownie if you are like presenting that all at once, right? Highly palatable foods are always going to be highly palatable, and that's fine for humans to want that. But if we can just take the like positive or negative out of it, or the like healthy or unhealthy or any of this dichotomous thinking around the foods, they're going to approach it at a much more emotionally neutral place than if they do have that.
Yeah. Like the idea of like fighting about food at the dinner table is just so, it's so hard.
It's hard. And I find myself doing that too. The goal of intuitive eating and this, raising our kids to have neutrality around food is just to like not apply any pressure.
Yeah.
Not like one more bite or isn't it good or good job. Like all of those things are like weighty, right? Like we feel that pressure. And if we can just release that, they're going to do much better, and they're going to do it on their own time, which can feel a little frightening for us sometimes because it's like, okay, I've presented them with broccoli 85 times and they've barely touched it. So how can I get them to like eat it? Your job is not to get them to do anything. Your job is to just keep presenting, keep presenting, keep presenting. Try to make it fun a little bit. Like, can you make the broccoli like little trees or put some snow on it with like Parmesan cheese or something? Like, make it fun for them so that they are enhancing that exposure to the food so that eventually they will try to lick it. And even a lick, like that's really amazing, but don't push it any further. Like just it's kind of like we're tiptoeing around it, but like the stress and the fighting and the pressure around the foods is not helping anybody's relationship with food because then dinner times are going to be stressful.
For sure. Yeah. My youngest is the pickiest eater of all of them, maybe because he's the youngest, but we introduced a no thank you bowl. Yeah. I think that concept is genius. And it was like, it's so simple. It's just the idea of like, like we'll stick with the broccoli example, but it's like you kiss the broccoli and then you can put it in your no thank you bowl because we also have a 97-pound dog trash can cleanup crew here. And so he definitely was into the idea of like tossing the food to the dog and the dog was like, I'll eat broccoli, like whatever. But like giving him a space where he can say, I don't want this and I don't want this on the plate. Like I'm all done with it. And sometimes like he'll take his whole dinner and stick it in the no thank you bowl. And I'm like, well, that was a fail.
Yeah. Cool.
Great. So I don't have another option, but like cereal. But I think that's such a helpful way for parents to look at it, because sometimes it's like, okay, well, they don't eat anything, but they don't have any way to say, like when they're really young, they don't have any way to say like, I don't want this. So you're giving them an out and releasing that pressure cooker feeling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love a no thank you bowl too, because that is them interacting with their food and enhancing the exposure to it. They actually have to physically pick it up or use like tongs to pick it up or whatever it is. And they're interacting with it. And maybe you could even have them like name it when they do that or say what color it is or whatever. All of those interactions are eventually going to be positive for them and eventually they're going to try it. So just pressure off, let them have on their plate what they feel comfortable with because also with younger kids, they have what's called neophobia around new foods. That food could be dangerous. If they're out in the wild when we were like hunter-gatherers, like they're not going to eat the berry that they don't know whether it's poisonous or not. If they see you eating it, if they see other people eating it, that's great. If they interact with it enough that they know that it's safe, they're eventually going to have it. But that neophobia around food is really, it's real. And that's why like from 2 to 5, kids are the pickiest because they like the beige, like easy things that are packaged that they know they like and isn't going to hurt them. But it is like the more catering that we're doing around that too, that could get us into trouble, further down the line. And if we're always accommodating for them, if we're always making new meals for them, we're just feeding the pickiness and that's going to backfire. So we don't want to do that either. So even if it seems like, we keep feeding our kid, exposing them to all these things, and they're not touching anything, that can feel a little worrisome. So just some just to put it out there, but some red flags if your kid is really picky and it doesn't seem like they're eating anything for a long time. The first thing to look at is, are they growing adequately? So with your doctor talking about that. And then the second thing is, are they continuously dropping safe foods? So foods that like hands down, they're likely going to eat. If they're hungry, they'll have the bread and butter, they'll have the fruit, they'll have, make the pasta with butter on it, whatever. And that's fine that those are all carbs. Our kids have to have carbs for growth and brain development. But those would be like the two main things. Like if they're continuously dropping fun food or safe foods, and if they are not growing adequately, then we need to have some sort of intervention. But it's just normal for our kids to not be eating this wide array of fruits and vegetables and whole grains and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Like our kids don't eat like they do on a commercial.
Yes.
I always look at those things. I'm like, that kid, how do they get that going there? Because Nah, I don't believe it.
Brag.
Yeah, exactly.
Brag.
I think the other thing too that I wanted to ask about was, how do you navigate or advise for people to navigate when you have parents that do not agree on strategies around feeding? Because I'm going to guess that this might come up once or twice.
It comes up a lot. I don't always have an answer for this because it just really depends on the dynamic of the parenting. Personally, I'm really lucky that my husband is like, you're the dietitian, you do you, like, I'll follow your lead. And he's really good at that. I think what has helped with a lot of like my Instagram followers with this is they'll buy my course or other courses that teach about intuitive eating and eating disorders and picky eating and all of that. And that can be really impactful to just have a little extra education around it and other viewpoints. Or podcasts can be really helpful too if your partner is willing. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think just the more education and the more open, the better. But as with any like parenting thing, if you're not agreeing, maybe you do need some sort of like middle ground to meet on, or some sort of mediation or something to help you land on the same page. Because it's not going to, your kid's going to feel that. If your partner is not agreeable to how you want to handle it, then like your kid's going to feel that. And that's just going to create more stress around the dinner table. And then nobody is getting health from
Right.
it. So,
right.
Yeah, good question. And I've been thinking about like, oh, how do I like develop a sneaky course or something or webinar for like partners that aren't into this to watch. But yeah, I don't know. It's tricky.
I think it's really tricky. And I think too, like, there's so much that is talked about now, when it comes to like sharing the load in families and conversations you need to have before you have children. And, all of this, like we're trying to, again, our generation is doing some pretty heavy lifting when it comes to like setting our kids up for success down the line when they move into this phase of life. But I feel like eating, because it is so personal, even when we do it with other people, eating it, like we all have our own relationship with food and with diet and with like body image and things like that, that doesn't come to the surface when you talk about like feeding a child until you're in it, like until you're all standing at the dining room table. Yeah. But I think too, like moms, we get exposed to it early on with the breastfeeding, bottle feeding, latching, not latching, like all of those dynamics around it. I think there's like an immediate drop in of pressure for moms to like lead the charge and to know how to feed a baby and all of those pieces, which doesn't necessarily pertain to like the broccoli, so to speak. But I think that by the time you get to the broccoli stage, you've already spearheaded so much of the decisions and the tracking and the management around eating and feeding that it's like, no, well, we just keep going on this train. So then you encounter someone who's like, well, I just like, I cleaned my plate when I was a kid because that's what was expected. And it's like, hold on.
Yeah.
We've had a few years of like me being responsible, and then this is happening. And how do we navigate that? Because you're so entrenched at that point.
Right. Right. And you get really good, if you know how to like respond to your kids' signals of hunger and fullness. And yeah, that's really tricky. Yes, as moms, we're thrown into it immediately with our babies, but also like just bringing it back to the beginning of our discussion with diet culture and beauty culture is that's all aimed towards mom.
Yeah.
Right. So we are the one, like women are the ones that are getting all of this outside pressure. One, to be the perfect mom, but two, to also look a certain way and eat a certain way to like be worthy and like have any sort of skin in the game with all of this. So like it's the like parenting side and the diet and beauty culture side that we're just like swimming in this thing that is taking us away from being able to listen to our bodies, to help our kids listen to their bodies, to have a positive relationship with food. So like there's so much messiness if we really like start to unravel all of this. Can get really tricky.
I think too, like, but I also think I'm like thinking on my feet here, but your opt-in to this like partners in feeding is like how to support as the not like if you're a non-breastfeeding, like if you are the other person, whatever that is. I don't know the language that makes it inclusive, but I want it to be inclusive. So I want to put the big asterisks around that. But like how to be the supportive person in that dynamic, because I think that what happens like my first child was breastfed and supplement. I pumped like still like
no, I hear that.
but because I pumped and because he was involved in that aspect of it, it wasn't like this was only my space. It was this conversation of, and I was back at work part-time. So it was like, here's what she eats typically during the day, but I was breastfeeding her and then pumping. And then, so he was like, this is how much she drinks with the bottle. So there was a back and forth there. So it's the further supporting argument for involving people right away and sharing something that is typically geared and targeted and marketed towards moms, like feed your baby and you're doing a great job, to like your family needs to feed this new member of your family. And how do you pass that off back and forth? Because then that sets you up for it not being this like incredibly entrenched viewpoints that clash at the like high chair at some point.
Right. Yeah.
There you go.
Great point.
There's your course.
There you go. I love that.
Oh my gosh. So how old are your kids?
So I have a 4.5-year-old Greta and a 2.5-year-old Remy. And they are two like very different kids with eating. Greta, when I had her, she was low for gestational age, low birth weight. And she was 4 days past my due date, but she was like 5 pounds.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of stress around feeding and helping her grow and all of the things. And I was a new mom. So I was like timing her, like how long she was on each breast and like how much she was getting and, you know, like all of the things. I had so much stress around her growth. And like now as a 4.5-year-old, she's never liked eating. Like she just never has liked eating. She's not really interested in food. I mean, she like loves a Cheeto or a Dorito, but she's also like very good at like self-regulating around it and just doesn't care that much. Yeah. But she's a small kid. She's like just less than first percentile. And that is just genetics because my husband's side of the family is really like small stature. And as time has gone on and I've come to accept like this is just who she is, it's taken a lot of pressure off of me to be like, I need her to grow. I need her to eat. I need to make sure she's doing blah, blah, blah to like get to where she's supposed to be on the growth curve, you know? And I think just as a message out there in general is like, first of all, every kid's different, but genetics play a huge role. And I see this especially when I have someone in a larger body that doesn't want their kid to grow up in a larger body. And it's kind of like, well, like their genetics are playing a really significant role in that. And can we just be the providers that offer food several times a day, offer balance and variety, offer movement throughout the day, you know, make sure they're not getting too much screen time and accept their body for what it is. So that's a big part of my platform too, is like, we need to just show our kids that they are worthy and loved no matter what their body is. And I know as parents, we all love our child, but if we're constantly trying to get them to eat less or to, you know, have a different body or talk about their body or put them on a diet or whatever, we are doing real harm, you know, and that acceptance of genetics and how big of a role genetics play in what our bodies look like, we need to like just kind of accept and let that go. There's only so much that we can do to change our bodies. And yeah, I mean, we need to find some acceptance there. Yeah. my 2-year-old is a little different. He's still, like 25th percentile, but he like will eat everything. So it's just so interesting, like kind of making sure I'm nurturing both of them in the same way. Because I imagine too, if I had kids that were in bigger bodies and I was worried about like bullying or their health or whatever, it'd be hard to treat them the same way around food. And we really want to avoid that.
Yeah.
So your simple question of how old are your kids just turned into a soapbox.
It's never
Here
a
we
simple
go.
question, though. That's the thing. It's never simple. It's not like you're not checking a box. Like, this is a whole other human that is coming out into the world. Like, I have 2 boys, and one of them is like the 99th percentile for height. Like, people think that he's a twin with his older sister, who's 2 years older than him, because he's just so tall. My 4th is my other boy, and he is like in the 25th percentile. And like that navigating differences, like I say this all the time. I'm like, they have the same mom and they have the same dad, and we've rolled the dice 4 times. And like, these people could not be more different. They all look related to each other, but like their personalities, the things they like, the things they don't like, the foods they like, and all of that stuff. It's just this idea of like, you can't just make like four. I mean, you can make 4 sandwiches, but broader strokes, you can't just like copy and paste what worked for the first one and then the second, third, and fourth, because it just doesn't work that way. And I think that we do a disservice to. I can see how we do that if you find something that works, but I think that we do a disservice to the person as an individual if we try and put everybody in the same box.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because even with your kids, like having that like conversation around like, okay, well, you can eat this, or you like to eat this. What about this? Would go very differently, right? Like if one of your kids is like, no, hard pass.
Yeah. And the other kid is like, give me all of that. Which is wild. And it's hard navigating those conversations sometimes, and even conversations around bodies. Like my oldest and my 4-year-old and my 2-year-old are pretty much the same size. And my 2-year-old has really caught up with my 4-year-old in the last year. And she's sometimes like, what? We're like wearing the same shoe size, or like he's going to be taller than me. Or I hear things that other people say as well, that she's like, well, he's going to be bigger than me soon, kind of thing. And it's like, okay, how do I navigate this in a way that's like going to, like, she feels safe and at home in her body, and he feels safe and at home in his body, because there's so much that could go awry there. But also, can we just keep that conversation ongoing and know that like scripts aren't always going to work, and we want to have open conversations about that, so that they, learn how to think critically about it and still feel like their body is cool and interesting and great, even though they're like less than first percentile or whatever it is, or their brother's bigger than them or whatever. It can feel kind of tricky.
Have you heard of the term meat suitcase before?
No.
I don't know where I heard this, but it was a quote somewhere. Someone was quoted by saying like, my body is just my like meat suitcase. Like who I am as a person and who I am as an individual is like, that is me. And like what I look like on the outside is just like that is what it is. Right.
Yeah.
And so for whatever reason that stuck. And I remember like, as kids get older and they move into school, and there's like people who have conversations with other kids about what they look like, and they bring their garbage, for lack of a podcast appropriate term, to the table on that is like, and I'm an OT. So my background is not, I've never had somebody who came into the hospital after an illness, an accident, an injury, something like that was like, man, I wish I had smaller pajama pants. You know what I mean? Like, I wish that whatever. So my whole experience with people and their bodies from a professional standpoint is, what can my body do? And so my like I guess, output in this is like what your body looks like is so far down the line in importance to what you can actually do with it. So when people say like, I look this way and I want to be different because blah, 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 I'm like, okay, can you run? Can you jump? Can you skip? Like, and not like that's the marker of health, but like, can you do the things with your body that you want it to do? That's the essential function of you as a person. Whatever you look like, whatever your pant size is, whatever your dress size is, whatever that is so far down the road from the fact that you can say, I want to do this and I therefore can do this. Or I want to do this and I struggle because of some, a limiting contributing factor, but I have found a way to adapt and to work with the body that I have, and accepting your body as it is. It doesn't mean that it's like sunshine and rainbows, but like, here's where I am able to interact with the world. And so how do I move, and how do I figure out a way to interact with the world in a way that allows me to engage in meaningful activity and to, to participate in all the things that I want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's like bringing up functionality is something that I talk about with my clients a lot too, that are really struggling with body image. And I think with kids, it's just like, how cool is it that you can like jump off of this platform and into this like thing of balls, or how like kids are so keyed into that. It's when we start making it about their appearance, or their friends do or whatever, where we can really intervene and be like, look, like that's not what's interesting about people. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is all of these other incredible things about what makes this person that person. And appearance is just, so far down the line of things that we should care about. So just reiterating that over and over. I have a bunch of books that are all about different bodies for my kids too, and just like bringing up some conversations within that too, to again help them think critically about like other bodies might look like this and might look like this and blah, 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 blah. We have so many different conversations around that, which I think is really helpful in just starting really young at being like, your body is important to take care of, and the appearance of it really means very, very, very little.
Yeah, exactly. And that, I think that's the message to drive home. Well, I would love to include any book recommendations you have, because I think that is a really awesome jump off point for parents. And I think too, like, I even notice with my own kids, like sometimes they'll talk about like books that they've read, like they'll see at the library, or like when I brought books into the house, like talked about, we had books about the pandemic and things like that. And so like just having something where they can sort of think about it in a way that is, or it can be brought up and they kind of feel like they have a resource to go through. I think that's a really cool way into conversations that you might not, like, you don't want to be like, hey, so for breakfast, we're going to talk about this and this and this, like on a Tuesday, and then like have a good day at school. Right. But I would love to include some book recommendations for parents, for kids and things like that.
Yeah. I have a handout with all of that, and I think a blog post too. So
awesome.
I'll include that for the show notes.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I love that you are really like meeting people where they're at and doing it in a way that's really accessible.
Yeah. That's what we have to do as practitioners, right? Like, I think there's so many messages out there, and it's easy to, I don't know. It's also nuanced, right? Like there's so much about this that's like, well, that's not what I learned, or I didn't know that, or, there's so much, and it's complicated, and there's not one size fits all for nutrition or body image or anything, or how to talk to our kids about this stuff either. So it's finding what feels best for us and what works for our families. And
I love it. Well, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you.